So, welcome to BPR Roundtable. My name is Jarrett Key. Joining me this morning is Resnik, co-founder of Brown Political Forum and correspondent for the Brown Politics Memo. And beside him is Chip Lebovitz, a writer for Blog Daily Herald. How are y'all doing this morning?
Doing well.
Glad to be here.
Great, awesome. So can y'all just talk about like your respective publications that you work for, like what you do, what you've written?
I'm a correspondent, like I said, for the Brown Politics Memo. I'm one of the opinions writers. I most recently wrote a piece on a website called Slantable, which is a news aggregator, which allows you to literally silence the opposition. They have a slider with liberal news on the left and conservative news on the right, and you can literally block one side or the other out. I wrote an opinions piece on how this is not, in fact, a news site. I've also written about the primaries. I've written a good bit about Mitt Romney. And for the politics, for the forum, we don't write anything, but we last week had a very good discussion on legalization of marijuana, and this week we'll be talking about affirmative action in college admission.
Great.
Mm-hmm. And the blog, compared to its counterpart, the Brown Daily Herald, is more, I would say, lighter side of Brown news and journalism, but it tries to cover from a unique, opinionated perspective all the things that happen in Brown, things that are happening around the various other Ivy League schools. And for example, my most recent piece was on this student at Columbia who wasn't actually a student. He was this resident of New York who pretended to be a student at Columbia for like 16 months, which is a scary thing to think of, but she got away with it for a long period of time. And I covered the actual story and a little bit of a more funny side of how you would think like a Brown student actually wasn't a Brown student, like how you could tell they were fake. Like they're attending every single sports event, or they actually went to the fall concert, or a couple other things like that. And it's trying to mesh the real world with Brown at the same time.
Nice. I mean, I guess that moves into my next question. When you sit down and you're about to write this article or write your opinionated piece, like, what is your goal? Is your goal to entertain your readers, like, because that's kind of entertaining to me, or is it like to swing them, to sway them, to influence them, or is it essentially just to inform them of like, oh, this is happening in the world, and yay for information?
I think it's one of those things where it depends on the publication that you're writing for. So obviously, if you're writing for something like the Brown Daily Herald or the Brown Daily Herald, or maybe even the Brown Politics Memo, you are coming at it from a little more of a serious perspective. At least we hope to be coming from a serious perspective. And you're trying to either inform or sway the reader. When you're coming to it from the blog, yes, you want to inform the person, but you'd like to inform somebody in the most interesting and entertaining way possible. Mm-hmm. So it's a balance of the two, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, for me, I'm an opinions writer. Influence is definitely important. But even more than that, I want to provide people with the resources necessary to get themselves informed. I try to include as many links and quotations and whatnot as humanly possible, so my pieces can serve as sort of a jumping off point for the greater topic.
Nice.
I think that's a good point, because we both write for more internet-based publications. I mean, that's the benefit of being able to hyperlink and whatnot. If you're in a printed edition, Dead Tree edition, you've got to think of, informing people through facts. And I mean, obviously, you're informing everybody through facts.
Hopefully.
But you're trying to do it in a way that actually is conveyable in like a few words. The nice thing about the internet, you can expand on, and find different pages and lead people to explore for themselves, in a sense.
It really lets you be up to the minute in a way that even a daily newspaper, like the Brown Daily Herald, just can't do.
Right. Well, I guess that's interesting, particularly with like printed word. You have like Washington Times, which is clearly kind of conservative leaning, and you have things like Mother Jones, which is like so liberal that it's hilarious. And so these publications clearly have a sway. They're clearly trying to influence the writer, and they clearly have a bias. So I guess my question is like, what is the role of bias in media, and like, is that a productive role? Like, should papers and should editorialists, like, is that kind of something that we should support and foster as a culture?
I think it's unavoidable to have bias in your piece. You're a human writing it. There is going to be some element of bias, no matter how hard you try. Now, the real question, it's a question of degree. Are you allowing bias to prevent people from getting the information that they need, or in the case of an opinion, to form a truly valid opinion? And I think that's one of the real problems with these really opinionated publications.
Is that
they willfully, in a lot of circumstances, or just by merit of the culture of the paper, they're just not accurate. Even an opinions piece can be fairly presented in a way that allows you to develop one of your own opinions.
Right.
But if you're reading nothing but the Fox, or say Glenn Beck's stuff, or Mother Jones, you're not able to form an opinion about any specific thing, and that actually sort of creates a barrier to being able to form a legitimate opinion about anything, at least in the news.
At the same time, I think when you come to these things, or at least when you go to a Glenn Beck, you go to a Fox News, you go in with the expectation that you're going to get a certain point of view, and you're probably going to that publication or that TV outlet or television show because you're expecting to get that and you kind of want to get that.
Right.
Whereas for when it comes to the general publications, I think there's a nice divide between opinion and actual articles. So for example, if you imagine the Wall Street Journal, which we both agree, very conservative.
Well, at least their editorial page.
But then you look at like the content, and it's there. And yes, does some of the conservatism of the editorial board tint the rest of the publication? Yeah. But I'd say for the most part, for these mainstream things, for the Washington Times, for example, I mean, I had the good fortune of this freshman summer being able to talk to one of the editorial writers. And yes, he's very conservative, but I think he recognizes that and he tries to be fair in a certain way.
Fair being trying to be more accurate with his depiction of whatever issues.
Well, if we're talking about mainstream stuff, Fox News is far and away the most watched news program on television, and they employed Glenn Beck for quite a bit of time. And you have these people absolutely going because they're expecting this certain slant to news, but they are primed to think to go because they think that is the only slant that is correct. They're going not because, I want to be spoon-fed what I want to hear. They're in a lot of circumstances, and I don't want to generalize, but there is this culture of we are the only ones providing any sort of indelible truth, and that means that we get to decide what is and is not actually a fact.
That's true, and I think that's a situation, I think that's fair for most of these, for MSNBC, for Fox News, and whatnot. And obviously that's a problem, but at the same time, there are so many sources now, that you can realize, and there are opportunities for people to know that there's more than just these two stations, or there's more than just these extreme partisan points of view. And I don't know, when it comes to, this is probably a little bit going off topic, when it comes to media bias as a whole, I like to think of it as just an expanded version of, Federalist 10, in that the parties all cancel each other out. So you've got Fox News, which is the most watched, and then you assume that MSNBC is the liberal counterpart, less watched, and then you would have the people from Fox News alleging that CNN actually is like center-left. So if you did some calculation of the percentage of CNN that was considered left, plus MSNBC, I'm sure it would equal the total viewership that you would get for Fox. At least
I'm glad you brought up CNN, because you have people like Jon Stewart who criticize CNN for trying to play this independent voice, like this unbiased voice, and like is that even like a real thing? Because like something that you said earlier is that like this kind of unbiased nature can't actually happen. Yeah. So then what becomes the role of the independent voice in media, or the voice that's trying to be independent, when like no matter you have someone being conservative, you have someone being liberal, you have someone trying to be independent, like now what? Like, no one is happy. Everyone's complaining still.
Yeah, talking about what you were saying about Federalist 10, yeah, I think probably Fox News plus the aggregate of, NBC and CNN and all that stuff, maybe that cancels out the total partisan voice in the news, but what does that do for discourse? It's you don't have people watching Fox News and then flipping over to MSNBC. Nobody watches, Hannity and then flips over to Maddow. You have a very compartmentalized news universe. And while maybe from the really macro standpoint, the sides are about equal, they're just that, they're sides. And you were, another point, and then I'll shut up. You were talking about how there are all these different news sources, which is absolutely true. I mean, if you look just on campus, we have this explosion of political news sources, but people are going in with the same attitude that they're going into to Fox News or MSNBC. You have basically this media market that caters to even the tiniest little niche, and they're presenting themselves as legitimate news sources, and they have the ability to put themselves out just as to the same extent. And essentially, you have people able to hear exactly what they want to hear, and that's the problem as far as I'm concerned.
I think it's true. I think it's also reflective of the polarized nature of our society today.
Right.
And then you have somebody like CNN who tries to be in the middle, and it's difficult. I mean, let's put this into a more pop culture related aspect. Look at the newsroom. It was you've got Will McAvoy trying to be down the center, and liberals hated it and conservatives hated it. This attempt at being, and actually everybody, just like there was even centrists didn't even like it to a certain point of view. And
I didn't even like the show.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I know a lot of people who were in politics who didn't like that show.
it's one of those things where it's hard given the society that we're in at the moment, and it's unfortunate. I wish it was the case that you could have more. I guess you could have Edward R. Murrow, Cronkite telling it how it is, and realistically, there should be that. There are the fact checkers who are also universally dismissed, despite their attempts at being objective. And it's this attempt at the middle. It's worthwhile, and I think it's something that should be expanded on. But at the moment, it's difficult.
But there's this fundamental difference between the world of the newsroom and, say, CNN and how they're approaching the middle. Will McAvoy is brutal to both. He asks the hard questions to both sides, as opposed to CNN. The real problem I see with CNN is that it's in its quest to be, fair and to present both sides. It's bloodless, and it's in fact opinionated in exactly the same way as Fox News. You are intentionally bringing in the other side in an almost arbitrary way. Sometimes the facts are not flattering to a certain group of people, but that doesn't mean that they're any less facts. And so you have these people, and I think Jim Lehrer, though that's not related to CNN, but you have these people who are not willing to follow up, lest they seem like they're helping out both sides.
You're absolutely right.
That's a good. We're gonna move. Actually, gonna move on to Jim Lehrer.
And so I'll eat less time.
So no, it's fine. So okay, so let's talk about this fact checking and the penalties that media people have for being dishonest. So let's talk about the debate. Jim Lehrer, he was criticized a lot because he didn't check Romney when he said things that were true. He didn't check Obama. And so then it becomes what is the role of media if we don't check them? Is it the responsibility of candidates? Is it the responsibility of the public to outcry and say, no, we deserve to know the truth? I think maybe you were going to go there, but I'm interested to see, if not the pundits, who?
I was actually going to go to, I thought your point with CNN, absolutely correct. They always just get the two people and they just fight it out, and it's not very helpful. I think when it comes to Lear, the problem with, I guess, being the moderator is if you're going to take this active role, you are going to be involved so seriously with the debate that somebody's always going to say that you did too much. Mm-hmm. And when you're coming in his situation, I don't think he did a good job, but his idea of letting the candidates fight it out, was, I mean, it was useful. You would say that it's hard to say anything was substantive about any of this election.
Right.
But this was the closest that we've gotten to what people would call more wonkish, in a sense. So I think in that regards, the two candidates themselves, they should have been fact-checking each other. I think Mitt Romney even went into the debate. Yes, he had his zingers, but he also said he was going to act as if like he was going to fact-check. And I thought that was actually an admirable thing for him to do. And I was hoping that Obama would do the same thing and they'd actually get it out on a substantive basis. That's actually why everyone was so happy that Paul Ryan was picked as the vice presidential candidate, because everyone thought that he'd bring substance. And you know what? They're the people running for president, and they should be the ones that are being honest to us about what they're trying to do.
And then you have, okay, so, great. I love that. I love that we're going to hold our political candidates to such levels of esteem that we respect, that we hope that they tell us the truth. However,
but
that's not the
truth.
truth.
There's also every single fact-checking institution known to man. I mean, the New York Times fact-check, the Wall Street Journal fact-check. You have the fact-checkers from the Tampa Bay Tribune. You've got fact-checks from the Washington Post. The Washington Post hires as they have their own in-house fact-checker. So you would like to believe the candidates do it, and I hope they do. But at the same time, there is that media fallback. And Jim Lear fact-checking in real time is an almost impossible task. You just have to imagine all the pieces of paper that have to file through in real time to be able to answer these questions. And B, he knows that he is somebody he can rely on the rest of the team to help out.
You see, I disagree on that point. I agreed with what you said about Jim Lehrer for the first 10 or 15 minutes of the debate. I thought it was really, really cool that he wasn't sticking his nose and was just letting the politicians run with it. But essentially, we got to the point where they were bold-facedly saying things that were plainly inaccurate. And yes, you can't be an encyclopedia. You can't have all of the knowledge about politics. But A, you're a newsman. You've been reporting this stuff. And B, some of the stuff was simply, it was simple to factually disprove. Romney saying that he had never proposed a tax cut, or rather maintaining the current tax rates for the wealthy. That is something that I could have disproved right now, and I'm not Jim Lehrer. You know, you get in this circumstance where people just are not willing to make that decision. It's
true, and there are some situations. I guess they're in the most obvious of them, the most well discussed. I think you would also include I think it's Medicaid cuts that are going to be a part of the plan.
716,
which is a part of both plans. And yes, should he have probably tried to stick himself out there and try to counter? That's probably what he should have done in those unique circumstances. There's also something to be said for when he was, I guess, trying to be not have an effect on the debate at all, in the sense that, and it's something that we've seen throughout the years, the media, represented by the moderator, also can become a tool. It's a catalyst for a complete change in debate. I mean, Newt Gingrich had his little success screaming at him. I think it was John King, for example, and ranting and raving. And I think in a certain situation in this first debate, that's what Lear was trying to do. I don't think it was the perfect strategy by any means, but something to consider.
Great. So I actually just want to kind of shift gears. So we're talking about the debates, and we're talking about let's go back to Newt Gingrich. He was successful in one debate super early on, and we even saw a rise in the polls. That's kind of what happened with Romney, I think, with this past debate. We see this kind of explosion of not explosion, at one point it's not an explosion, but it's significant. So I guess just to talk politics for a second, what do you think Obama can do in the next debate or in general to try to get back his ground that he lost?
All right, let's look at this in perspective for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
The race that this is absolutely closest to is the 2004 presidential election, where you had initially a very strong, energetic incumbent going against sort of a sort of aloof-seeming or portrayed as such challenger. George Bush got taken to task by John Kerry in the first debate. John Kerry's polls rose by an average of 4.2, essentially tying him up a month before the election. Mitt Romney has gotten a rise of 3.8 on average. Not to go complete policy wonk. But at any rate, this has happened before. There's a lot of hand-wringing on both sides. Mm-hmm. It's not good for Obama, but this is not the political apocalypse. Now, to fix this, it's going to start with Joe Biden coming out and being the scrappy guy from Scranton. Right. He essentially, the Obama campaign doesn't make the same mistake twice. And so I think it's really just a question of energy. He needs to recover what he has already done just a few weeks back at the convention. Mm-hmm.
I think you're absolutely right comparing it to the 2004 race. That was I think I read the same article that you did with the Real Clear Politics polling averages, and it's really interesting, and it's something to consider. Though I will have to say one thing, I don't know if it's going to be as easy for Obama in the one sense that Joe Biden is considered a gaffe machine. Right. So in the media, if you want to talk about as the corresponding entity, is kind of looking for that in a sense. It's a narrative that has happened before, and it's something that they might have happen again. And there was, I think, some Republican strategist said in another political article that Joe Biden, guns a-blazing, is usually a Joe Biden that misfires. And I don't think he will. He had a great performance in 2008 against Sarah Palin, and that was when people were expecting the worst, and people are expecting the worst again. I think it's a situation where, let's say he does do well, it'll be back to the race will be back to the same place that it's been for, I guess, the months preceding the conventions. It's one of those things where these polling bumps, unless Mitt Romney does well, I guess Paul Ryan wins, and then Mitt Romney wins the second debate, I'd see these things just as I originally saw the convention bump that Obama had as more fleeting. You know, it's a very polarized election. They're very hard in lines.
So let's talk about expectations for a second, because you mentioned, like, Joe Biden's kind of expected to probably mess up. And because we expect that, we'll be more accepting of it. Obama was expected to do really well. He didn't do as well as people thought. So like, when media talks about, like, oh, we expect this, we expect that, and you set these standards for candidates, like, what do you think the role of that expectation plays in with how we judge the performance?
I mean, the expectations game is just a fact of politics. It was a surprisingly big deal when Chris Christie, came on the Sunday shows before the first debate and was like, Romney is going to hit it out of the park. He's going to home run. It's going to be great. And everyone was like, wow, Chris Christie, what are you doing? This is really not good. You want to lower expectations before every debate. So in case you actually do screw up, you won't suffer as much. It's one of those situations where I don't know if the expectations game is a good thing. I think that there are better things to be focused on when it comes to the news in general. But it happens. Yeah. It's just something you have to deal with.
Yeah, like he said, the expectations game is going to happen. Going off of that, it can bias how we're perceiving the news. We have this perception of Joe Biden as a gaffe machine, and people love to write that story. People love to write stories using the word gaffe. I assume because it's a really fun word to say.
It looks like giraffe.
But honestly, he's the vice president. He's the vice president of the United States. He was chosen in that office in large part because of his demonstrated competence in the Democratic primaries for that race.
Yeah, it's appeal to white working class workers.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
but
the VP
there
pick
were,
is always going to be appeal to somebody.
Yeah, there were plenty of people who were appealing in that regard. He demonstrated himself as strong. At the end of the day, this is a man who has been a statesman for decades. Yeah. He has faced bigger challenges to his political life and to his identity as a person than Paul Ryan. What's more, he knows Paul Ryan. They're on equal footing. They work together in Congress. Mitt Romney and Obama, if I remember correctly, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, if I remember correctly, I believe that they'd only met 3 times prior, period. Now, Joe Biden has worked with Paul Ryan, and Paul Ryan has worked with Joe Biden on a number of things. They know how the other one works, and they're going to be on their feet. You know, there are not going to be any angles that the other one is not expecting. They're going to be prepared, and they're going to be in their zone because they know how much is riding on this.
Right. I agree. I think Joe Biden's dumb like a fox, in the sense that I almost feel like the Obama campaign, or at least the Obama administration's like, we had a bad week. Yeah. Joe, go out there and say something ridiculous. I think he'll actually go out, and I think he's going to win. I don't know. I don't think it's going to be a straight-out win, but if you combine the expectations game, which I'd say if you looked at in-trade and it was Joe Biden making a gaffe in this debate, I'm sure it would be trading. It'd be pretty high, above 50%. So it's one of those things where I think he'll do well enough combined with the expectations that, will neutralize what we just discussed before.
Yeah, I think one of the elements that people are not paying particularly strong attention to is that Paul Ryan has not gotten to be who he was chosen because of this perception that he is. He hasn't gotten to be this new brand of conservative firebrand. He's been playing as basically Mitt Romney in miniature. Right. And he hasn't been doing particularly well on the campaign trail. From his selection, from his acceptance speech as the vice presidential candidate onward, he hasn't been making inroads, as far as I'm aware, in any places that have particularly helped. He hasn't really put Wisconsin into play. I honestly think that's hype. He got booed at the AARP, for God's sake, for saying a Romney campaign talking point.
Right.
I think that people are overestimating his position.
But then that becomes like, is it Paul Ryan or the fact that people just don't relate to Mitt Romney's message?
It's not going to matter.
That's a completely different conversation.
It's not going to matter.
And so I totally agree with you about Wisconsin. I think that's all hype. Also, we're kind of running out of time, so I'm just going to wrap up with a little cute question. So what's coming next for you two? Obviously, you're both very passionate about the election, so I'm assuming that you'll be doing a lot of writing coming up about the election. Are you looking at particular angles to focus on, or?
We'll see. Whatever the blog allows me to write, I'll write for them. I mean, it's one of the things. Maybe I was in Pinion's column this last year for the Brown Daily Herald. I might write a couple here and there. But it's one of those things where you got to balance everything, and you see what you can do, and you try to write whatever people want to find or people potentially think interesting.
I'm, of course, going to be writing a lot of elections-based stuff. I think it's important to know that there's a lot of things besides the presidential race that are happening, The Senate race is at stake. Eric Cantor, who represents my district, the Virginia 7th, where I'm from, which includes Richmond, is facing a very spirited challenge from a guy named Wayne Powell. And there is an outside shot that the House Majority Leader will be unseated. And I think that there's all sorts of stuff like that is just being drowned out by how loud all of the other campaigns are screaming. So I'm gonna be trying to elucidate parts of this cycle that have not been not had enough time devoted to it. Now the forum. If we're plugging here, Mondays at 9 o'clock in Wilson 103, we're going to be discussing things not directly related to the election itself, but that are real ongoing concerns. We're going to be next Monday discussing affirmative action on college campuses. So there are essentially the campaign is a very temporal, ephemeral thing, but there are ongoing discussions that need to and deserve to be had.
Sure.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. This is a lot of fun. I hope you had a good time.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Great. Thank you all so much.